to think now about the whole terrorism problem and the local economy solutions to it. One possible answer is, you might say it's technical, and in an area I think that you, my listener, would appreciate, and that is the man who is armed as protector and defender of the weak and the innocent. I would say in that category are women and children. We as men, we get the door for the woman, we look out for children, and by God's grace, we would be willing to die in the defense of innocent people if called to. If God puts us in a circumstance to weigh the risk of bold action to defend someone, hopefully we would be thinking so much of the other person that we would not even weigh for a second the risks and the fear that would come with that weighing out the risk of engaging in someone who's a terrorist, firing his weapon at people or driving a car into people. We would simply act spontaneously to defend those innocent people near us who are being threatened. We would act because we're armed. The armed citizen is a decentralized solution to crime, right? If the populace is armed, then we don't need the state, and we can act as the state figures things out, as the state actor gets there, the officer gets there, or is being called there. We have already solved the problem because we are there. The solution is at hand. The solution is under jacket, right? The solution is on the belt that you have your 9mm or your 380 or your 45. It's right there, and you are, in God's providence, able to act courageously on behalf of an innocent person. So that's a technical solution. The other is one we're going to get to in just a minute, and that is not living in fear, because terrorism, that of the kind, say, Fulus Saipov engaged in yesterday afternoon, is a religious action. And the question, of course, swirls on TV, on the TV talk shows this morning. How come they didn't know? Was he on the radar? He's called a lone wolf. I call such people lone lambs. And the question about surveillance is one that came to me this morning in a matter of personal business. And I get it very early, and in my inbox was a bit of correspondence from a programmer, a friend of mine in the area, John Kozlowski. He and I, he's a man whom I've had some dealings with in his personal life. We're both Christians, and we've been involved in some of the same issues. And the question that came up this morning was, who is watching me, David Tulis, an innocent person, an absolutely harmless, innocuous person, who might be caring about my connections with this man, who's a programmer, a businessman living in Cleveland, working in the software field for gas pump operations. What would anybody care about a private connection between me, an American Chattanooga resident, and this man, John Kozlowski, an American Cleveland, Tennessee resident? John, maybe you could tell my listener what we're talking about.
Good morning, David. Yes, what occurred this morning was I have a personal website. It has information on it that is a personal nature and in relationship to the institutional church, which I am dealing with. And you got onto the site this morning and looked at a few pages that could include PDF files, the files that you can, that are electronic copy of a printed page. So you did that, and I happened to look at the log this morning and found that when you did that, somebody else did the identical thing within a second. So obviously the someone else was not a human being, but a computer. And so I out of curiosity, looked. I saw your access, and I saw another access, which just happened to be from Bluffdale, Utah. Bluffdale, Utah is a location of the Utah Data Center, which captures everything, all your emails, all your phone calls, everything, not just metadata, the audio and the text itself. This is a massive data center. Whether or not this was actually that data center or simply somebody in the area, I don't know. But obviously it happened at the same second. Therefore, somebody in that region knew that you were looking at these pages. In actuality, they preempted you, because when you went to the page, they got the information before you did. So
what do you mean by that? Explain that. Be specific and explain, John Kozlowski, programmer.
Well, what happened is the page you looked at was a page that included in the page, embedded into the page, this PDF file. So what your browser did when you went to the page, it first got the HTML page that you would normally see when you go to a web page. And it also then grabbed the PDF file, which was embedded into it. However, what may have occurred, and this is only an educated guess, and I would suggest this is an educated guess. Your traffic was monitored, and I would suggest it's your traffic, not mine, because it was you only, not other people, but you only had this occur. And so you went to you went and got the page, and then your browser went and got the PDF file. Well, somebody saw you get the page, and before your browser went to get the PDF file, somebody faster went and got the PDF file. So somebody was mirroring what you were doing. And again, this was not a person, a computer. And the implication is, from the IP address of this location, was Bluffdale, Utah. So if it was the state, if it was a third party, I don't know. But obviously what you did was replicated by another computer. And like I say, I have the records. I purposely do not keep detailed logs. Since we have communicated, I'm now logging every message. If people who are familiar with it will know of Wireshark, I am capturing everything right now on that server just to see if this will happen again.
Well, maybe we're talking about such a small number of people, John Kozlowski, that it's all insignificant. So maybe you had 5 people on your website in the past 6 months, or maybe you had 50. Does that matter? I mean, if someone tags along on my internet work with a small number, that really is not very significant. But if there are a larger number of visitors, then it would seem significant that just one that would be mine would be under view.
Well, yes. This again is a personal website, and there are maybe half dozen people per day who are looking at this because and getting PDF files from the site. It was yours and yours alone. You're the first one this morning, and it's been yours and yours alone that has this mirroring that's going on.
Well, what's somebody else? Tell my listener, John Kozlowski, about Bluffdale, Utah. You say there's a data center there. What's the data center about? How does it work? What is the purpose of the party there, which has absorbed a huge amount of real estate, to have that center? What is the goal of this center?
Sure. This is the National Security Agency. Used to be known as no such agency. It is the National Security Agency. They have a data center on the East Coast. They have one in San Antonio, Texas, and they have the largest in Bluffdale, Utah. This is a several billion-dollar facility. It has massive, I mean, literally millions of computers. It has enough storage capacity to store several 100 gigabytes of data for every man, woman, and child in the United States. So all your records and whatnot can easily be stored there, and they're not forgotten. Every single, there are like 30 different locations within the United States and others outside of the United States where internet traffic goes through. The noted one was the room 641A in California, which this is when it became public. But there, like I say, there's about 30 of these, and they have. So all traffic, like I say, internet, phone calls, and whatnot, go through these data centers. A copy of that is sent to the Utah data center. So everything that's occurring, no matter how, a husband and wife are talking about a shopping list, all those things are copied. And so if you want to know something about what happened to you 3 years ago, it's there. And the purpose for this is obviously to protect us. Or we could look at it another way.
You're saying protect with scare quotes around it, John Kozlowski, right?
Absolutely.
Well, I guess that leads us to the question of do we want government to be judicial or proactive? We have the current model, which is the anti-Christian, anti-biblical model of government. As I was telling a couple at dinner last night, I actually had a date last night with Jeanette, John, and we had dinner with another couple about our age, late 50s. and it came up. The question came up about judicial government versus proactive government. The biblical model is passive. Government is passive. And if you, my listener, want to hear more about that, go to Nooganomics.com, our chief sponsor on the David Tulis Show, and there I make the case for government that is along the biblical model rather than what we have now. And I think what we have now, John, is very active. It's proactive, and because it's so concerned about safety and security, it is the security state. It has every reason to absorb every piece of communication, not just important secret documents between corporate competitors, but things as inane as shopping lists and text messages to your wife when you say, we'll be late for dinner tonight, have meeting that's running long, period. Well, maybe you don't put the period in there. But anyway, that system at Bluffdale captures that text message for security purposes, right?
Absolutely. Well, as you are aware, it to me it's ironic. One of the fundamental reasons that the state would want to do this is to instill in the population intimidation. You now have to be careful what you say. It's not that you're going to be followed specifically, but the reason you have leaks like the Snowden leaks and things of that nature is not necessarily so you will take action, but you now know the state monitors you, and therefore you will second guess, should I talk about this? This is not something I want to say publicly. I don't want it to be heard. So I'm just going to go along to get along. And obviously, as you and I have talked, yesterday I had a visit from a representative of the state, ironically, on the 500th anniversary of Martin Luther's hammering the 95 Theses on the wall of the church. And what am I doing? I am personally in contention with a few churches in reference to their understanding of Scripture. Why would somebody want to stop me on this? This is an intimidation factor. They do, people don't want you to speak freely. They don't want you to say, to contend. This is not what we're supposed to do. Whereas I would suggest it's the biblical model.
Well, just so my listener isn't too mystified by what you're saying, John Kozlowski, I might just briefly reveal that we're talking here about correspondence that you're having with these other parties, including the churches, and it's in regards to your wife, or as these parties would say, your ex-wife, since there was a statutory divorce, and you are seeking reconciliation, and you're also seeking to assert your legal rights to have visitation and contact with your numerous children, right, John?
Yes, that is true. And the irony is to me that when you contend with leadership of the institutional church and they respond with silence, I would suggest they are denying the Scripture that they uphold. And when they turn around and violate 1 Corinthians 6 and go to the state to protect themselves against me, this is again an intimidation. It's exactly what the state does. And unfortunately, it's what the institutional church does too.
This is David Tulis. Thanks for joining us. We're talking with John Kozlowski, and we're hearing about what we understand to be prior restraint by the national power by having total surveillance. Nothing you say in the end is private, and these searches by the good people in Washington of all your data, not just the metadata, but the actual content of all emails, all time spent on websites, all correspondence, all text messages, all videos, all Facebook posts, all Facebook live videos, all absorbed by the Bluffdale, Utah data center or others. And the reason I have John Kozlowski on the phone is not so much to care about his personal dilemmas and his private life, which is one reason I was speaking with him this morning by email, but just to point out that when I went to his website that dealt with some of the questions with which I'm speaking with him in private, right? This is a private conversation about his private problems, personal, innocent, harmless, innocuous life that he has and that I have. There was someone, as he tells me, someone or some entity that tracked my use of his website from Bluffdale, Utah. Of course, it could be just coincidence. It could be something entirely harmless, but it suggests, John, that someone cares about me, and it's called prior restraint when the state puts a muzzle on the press. I am a member of the mainstream media, even though I may not like that expression. I am, we're the CBS radio affiliate. I'm a writer and journalist. I've been very critical about government and trying to encourage God's people to man up and to take courage to exercise their rights and to understand our peril. We are in grave peril. John Kozlowski, anything else you wanted to mention regarding this little bit of mirror internet work by the good people against me?
Well, yeah, it should be noted this occurred over the period of 2 minutes, and each time you were preempted by a second. So this is obviously done electronically, and it was done purposely. I don't see that happening on my site. I am capturing now to see if it's occurring, but it has happened only with you. So the suggestion would be, and it's just a light suggestion, that somehow you, David Tulis, are being targeted, rather than me. And of course, the same thing is you talk about prior restraint. Yes. Why would the institutional church send out a police officer to my house in order to prevent me specifically from communicating with the institutional church? Why would that be?
Right, and you're making.
What are they afraid of?
Yeah, you're making biblical arguments to these bodies. You're citing scripture. Of course, they're not in a position to hear you, as I told you this morning, in a private letter. Not private letter, but in a letter, now publicly viewed by some snoop that you have certain. I was trying to analyze your situation, but here we have, again, it's private correspondence. It's nobody's business what it is. And here you, the programmer, the whiz online whiz with computers, writer of software, are finding that David Tulis, innocuous journalist, has attained notice, attained maybe a bit of notoriety. So
yeah. Yeah, well, the issue here is I have an advantage in the sense that this is my field. I understand. I'm familiar with the computer security and how to steal from you. I know how to steal from you. I don't. I want to protect you. And the same thing. I am now that I'm 61. I think I've built up enough understanding of the scripture in order to contend with the institution. And of course, same as the state, they got to protect themselves from that.
John Kozlowski, thank you very much.
Delighted.
This is David Tulis. We've been chatting with John Kozlowski, a programmer in Cleveland, Tennessee, who says that my private correspondence with him and my visiting of his private website was surveyed today by unknown parties in Bluffdale, Utah, where there's a massive NSA center and a multi-billion-dollar outlay by the national government. Well, I bring this up. It's all providential and it's all coincidental, you could say, but I bring it up because I want to mention the problem, the dilemma that we have regarding terrorism. Terrorism is what brought us here, right? Because we are the aggressors overseas. Terrorism has come here, and therefore we, the national government, have to protect you, the citizen. The motivation of the terrorist and his ultimate goal, I want to suggest, is this: it's sending a message. Now, let me just tell you what I get from Bo Marinoff. He is a writer who has written important work. His name is Bo Marinoff. I'm a regular listener of his blog. It's called, or his podcast. It's called Axe to the Root, and he has a biblical analysis of terrorism and solutions. There are solutions, and one of the analysis begins with the concept that terrorism has a purpose of creating fear. Obviously, well, what is fear? Fear is a religious concept. It is an idol. If you make it an idol, if you have fear, it becomes an idol to you. He says the murders, the destruction, the spending of resources, and even the sacrifice of his own life, of the Saifulos Saipovs of the world, are all directed not to his immediate victims, but to a broader audience. Okay, that's Washington. He knows that his message is at best peripheral to the world and life of that broader audience. If he was to use the conventional methods of preaching, right, his message, as the Christian church does, he would just be a small person standing in one corner of a vast universe. He lacks the resources to capture a significant part of the media market and make his message mainstream. His message is morally and intellectually inferior to all other ideas in the marketplace of ideas. He is short on time. The more time goes by, the less relevant his message is to that broader audience. And his conventional preaching can't catch up with the course of history. What he needs is a marketing campaign for his idea, a stunt that will make people listen to it. And since the ethical standards behind his message do not condemn murder, arson, or suicide, and even encourage them, his decision is to commit public crimes to make his message heard. And he says, therefore, in essence, now this is significant, that terrorism is a perverse counterpart of Christian evangelism. Both the Christian and the terrorist have a message to the world, a gospel. Both messages are religious and ethical. That is, they have to do with commitment to ultimate principles and standards for good and evil. Both the Christian and the terrorist are willing to spend their resources and lay down their lives for their message. The difference comes in their belief about the judgment that confirms the message. The Christian leaves the judgment to God, the only judge. The terrorist believes, now this is in contrast, right? His message makes him quasi-divine, and therefore he takes it upon himself to administer judgment in order to make the message heard. The Christian prays to God to change people's minds to accept the gospel without punishing them. That's Luke chapter 9, 54 to 56, and then Luke 23, verse 34. The terrorist administers his judgment as part of the message. This point may seem trivial to some, but it is of utmost importance in our analysis of the situation and specifically the solutions to it. If terrorism is not an ordinary crime, it's not warfare and not simply the chaotic work of a madman, then all the modern attempts of solution of the problem with terrorism are doomed to fail. Of all people, he says, we as Christians should know best that a message, an idea, a gospel is not stopped by government intervention. Sending more troops halfway across the world will increase government spending, as we hear about in Afghanistan, but won't stop terrorism. Terrorism is not warfare, and therefore warfare won't kill it. Giving more power to law enforcement institutions here at home will destroy our liberties, but it won't stop terrorism. Terrorism is not an ordinary crime. Psychological profiling of people, will that work? Well, it won't stop terrorism. Terrorism is not a mental deviation. The terrorists are just as sane as everybody else. These measures will only increase the risk of terrorism. They will deprive us of our liberties. They won't achieve their goal because an idea, a message, a gospel is not stopped by government action. The only way to stop one gospel from being preached is through a superior gospel, one that will make the target audience resistant enough to make the efforts of the preachers, meaning the Muslim terrorist preachers, useless. When the preaching doesn't work, but instead produces the opposite effect in the listeners, then the preacher will be forced to review his methods. What should lead us to the next conclusion? If terrorism is on the rise despite the war on terrorism, then we're doing something to encourage terrorists rather than to discourage them. That is, there's something in our collective reaction to terrorism which the terrorists assess as a success. We are obviously not only taking their gospel, we're submitting to it. We're submitting to their gospel in a way by this rearing up of the total state. If evangelism of terrorism continues, then this must be because its target audience is submitting to the message. And unless we stop submitting to it, there will be no end to it. That is to say, and he developed the point, we need to stop living in fear because that's the goal of that idolatry.
Traffic, news, and information. Nooga Radio. Digital FM 95.3 HD4 and 92.7.